Everything from love to hate, from hot to cold, is the same thing. It's just on a spectrum. Different degrees on a spectrum. That's what I'm going to talk about today, the law of polarity. This universal law governs everything. You can see it everywhere, in the physical world to the mental world. It is a very powerful law that, if you understand, can transform your life. Welcome. My name is Ivor Churchill. If you don't know me, I've spent the last 10 years figuring out my mind. How does it work? How does my mind work? How can I get what I want in my life? By controlling my mind. And after figuring everything out, after exploration, I help people like you to do the same thing. So if that sounds good to you, let's get into the video. The law of polarity. By the end of this video, I want to give you a really practical guide how you can use the law of polarity in your life, how you can understand the rules of the universe more clearly to get what you want in your life. So number one, everything is a spectrum. What do I mean by this? Well, I mean that, as I said before, everything is on a spectrum. When you understand this, it's very powerful because you see love and hate as the same thing, just on different ends of the spectrum. Everything is suddenly connected. There's no polarity, there's no like separation between good and evil. It's just the same thing on different sides. And we see this everywhere in the physical world. Hot, cold, night, day. I put the yin and yang symbol on the thumbnail of this video because yin and yang, the symbol from Taoism, is night and day. It is male, female. It is the blending, the opposites, but complementing each other, right? So you cannot have day without cold. You cannot have hot without cold. You cannot have night without day. You cannot have male without female. Something interesting about this law is when I started to think about it more, it made me realize this concept of peace and war, one being good and one being bad, is kind of strange, because how can you have peace without war? If it was just peaceful all the time, there would be no meaning to peace. Same with rich and poor. You know, what does rich mean without poor? It makes you think, can these things exist? If there was no poor, then everybody would just be medium. It's confusing. I don't know if it's possible, but it seems in the world everything has to have an opposite. So therefore, there will always be rich people and there will always be poor people. Hopefully there won't be poor people always, because, you know, we don't want poverty and suffering forever. But how can you have happiness without suffering? You know, you see what I mean? Like, one cannot exist without the other. Pleasure cannot exist without pain. So everything has an opposite. And when you understand this, you see that everything is connected. And this gives you power as well, because you stop seeing, for example, failure as failure. You might think, maybe I'm not in the situation I want to be in. Maybe I've failed in something. So you might see yourself as the opposite of success. But you have to understand failure and success are on the same spectrum and they're connected. Every successful person fails a lot. They all went through a period of failure. It is the same thing. So that's the first point to understand. And number two is opposites vary in degree, but they are the same. So I put love and hate on the opposite spectrum. So this is pretty powerful to think they're the same. Poverty and rich is the same domain, but it's just the opposite ends of the spectrum. It's the area of wealth. and then night and day is the area of light. Maybe that sounds obvious, right? But to say they are the same thing is a new concept, I think, for most people, right? Because if you think about a successful person and a failure, let's say like a billionaire and a homeless people, they are the same. They're not the same, but they're just opposite ends of the same spectrum. That's an interesting way of thinking about it, because we always think about things as binary. You're either a failure or a success. But we don't think like a homeless person can go all the way to the other end of the spectrum and become a billionaire. In fact, that's already happened. Jean-Paul Dejorier, you can Google him, was homeless at one point, and now he's a billionaire. He founded John Paul Mitchell Systems, a hair shampoo company, and Patron tequila. So that's just an example. Just because somebody's homeless doesn't mean they can't become a billionaire, right? So powerful, very powerful. So if you ever feel like you're not what you want to be, just remember that you can shift to the other side. Number 3 is mental and emotional transmutation is possible. So what this means is that with mental and emotional states, we can shift to the other side. So as I said, with rich and poor, let's say we are feeling very afraid and pessimistic and just a lot of negative emotion. Fear, maybe, doubt, all the negative emotions. We can understand that those emotions are also on a spectrum, and the other side of them are courage, confidence, bravery, these kind of emotions. So what we can do is we can shift to the other side. We can say, okay, I want to feel this way. So in a practical sense, how would we do that? Well, we would change our root of our paradigm, which is our thinking and our beliefs. So you can actively think courageous thoughts. Because if you're feeling a certain way, it's because you're thinking a certain way. And also, if you want to change your beliefs, then you have to reprogram them. And you reprogram them with affirmations, with visualization, with hypnosis, all these techniques to change the root programming of your paradigm. So that's how we shift our emotional states. So number 4 is all truths are half-truths, not binary. So what this means is that we often think things are binary. The world is good or the world is bad based on our perspective, or, somebody is good, somebody is bad. So we see things as black and white, but we forget that everything has an opposite. So if we look at things in a binary way, if we look at the world in a binary way, one political party is good and therefore the other is bad, then we only see half of the truth, because every side has a truth to it. What the other political side maybe has some good sides. So what this means is everything has one, maybe we're only seeing one side to things. You know what I mean? If you think you're a failure or you think you're a success, you're forgetting that you have a side sometimes where you're a failure, or you have a side sometimes where you're successful. So nothing is 100% true. Everything is half true. And there's another side, there's another polarity to that, right? So number 5, duality provides contrast and balance. So what this means is that duality gives contrast and balance. So, we always have to have that balance. So what would summer be without winter? You wouldn't enjoy summer as much if there wasn't winter. What would, the daytime wouldn't be as nice if there wasn't a nighttime. So it gives balance and it gives contrast. You know, if it was always daylight and it was always summer and we were always happy, life would be pretty, there'd be no contrast, right? There'd be no swings and highs and lows, right? Or not highs and lows, but there'd be no contrast. Contrast gives us a kind of perspective. So that's the point about that. So I guess the point about that is maybe we can see that, you know, things changing in our lives, you know, this nature of things changing from one way to the other as a good thing, right? So we appreciate the night because it makes the day better, and we appreciate the night because it makes the day better, if that makes sense. So, number 6, mindset determines which pole you experience. So what this means is your mindset determines which side you see. So if you're very pessimistic, you're only going to see the negative side. And if you're hyper positive and you're a bit delusionally positive, you're only going to see the positive side. You're not going to see the risks. So what this means is we need a healthy mindset which sees both sides, but it's not too far on one side, right? So we're positive, but we also see risks and we see downside. We have a holistic view of the world. Number 7, failure and success are on a spectrum. Limiting beliefs and power beliefs are on a spectrum. So what this means in a practical sense, because I want to give you guys a practical takeaway from this law, because this is quite theoretical, quite esoteric. So on a practical sense, what this means is if you're at a point in your life where you feel like you're experiencing failure, just see that as a spectrum that you can shift towards success. So understand that everybody who succeeds goes from one side of failure to the side of success. They are interconnected. There is nothing bad about that feeling. Everybody starts out feeling like that when you have to experience failures to reach success. The same is true with limiting beliefs. If you have limiting beliefs, you can transform them into empowering beliefs because they are the same thing on different sides of the spectrum. Okay? And then number 8, lastly, is empower conscious creation over victimhood. So when we start to see polarity in our lives, we understand that we can choose conscious creation. We can choose empowerment over victimhood. So victimhood is the opposite polarity from empowered conscious creation. So what we want to do is if we're feeling like a victim, if we're blaming other things, if we're making excuses for our life, if we are believing limiting beliefs, we can understand that that is one side of a spectrum that's connected to the opposite empowering side, and we can shift over to the other side. And that's all I can go into for today. But if you want more information like this, I've got a free group you can join where I give more tips about these kind of techniques. And also, you can also book a call to have a chat with me about your situation. Totally free. So if you want to do either of those, you're welcome. Have a great day. See you next time.